Go with the next presentation that will be made by Adina Dumitru about theories of change in sustainability transitions, focusing on the role of individual and collective agency, which is a central aspect of this meeting. Adina?
Okay, so I think I'll just use the mobile microphone and stay here for the presentations. So I gave a lot of thought. I really hated the title I gave then to my presentation because it's so broad that it's very hard to decide what to talk about. And I decided that I will just basically raise a few questions instead of really giving answers or project results, because we can provide project results in other ways, like through our reports and many other things. And it's not enough time in 10 minutes to do that. So I will just speak a bit about what psychology has to say for agency. So what are the relevant issues that we could bring to the table when we talk about agency? And as I said, that raises more questions than answers. And after that, Richard will also take this up in his talk about the role of space in agency and what that happens. We already had a talk, I must say. Yesterday, we had a presentation by Richard, and so discussion already started. And I'll make some reference. Okay, that's good. Okay, we can go further. So, what is agency? You know, this is a problematic question. It's very hard to answer these questions, and there are probably, not probably, there are manuals, entire manuals in sociology, in psychology, in neuroscience, in agent-based modeling, and in all kinds of other disciplines on what is agency. But I just take a more limited perspective here, which is the perspective of psychology. Although initially, or in this text formulated by an economist, which is people's ability to act on goals that matter to them. A very simple definition that Amartya Sen gave. And he also was maybe the first one to say that this is a core ingredient of positive social change. I think that's true to a certain extent, but we can also discuss in the end, and I will say a few things about the dark side of agency. I think agency is neutral. We tend to see it positively, but it depends. Agency can be negatively oriented in some circumstances.
Can you give some example? What do you have in mind of negative? I'm trying to...
I will give some example at the end. Can I give that at the end, Domenico? Okay. Okay, and Bandura, which is a social psychologist, he's one of the few that took on the issue of agency, because psychologists do not use this term a lot, so it's more sociologists that have coined this. But he defined this as the active involvement in shaping our own destiny, a capacity by which he defined it as a capacity. So it's a capacity by which we are producers of experiences and shapers of events. This obviously has a philosophical dimension to it, a phenomenological dimension to it, and a psychological dimension to it. Let's go further. There's lots of things that have been said about agency that I think are important and relevant for the things we discuss here. So some people have seen it as practical reason and control over one's environment, our ability to control our environment. Others have defined it as freedom of choice and action. This was a classical, sort of a classical approach to agency for a while. Galtung, as you know, is a researcher who discussed structural poverty. He called it being an active subject, so not being submitted or enslaved by circumstances. Participation by Max Neef, and finally, one approach I like a lot is the approach of self-determination theory in psychology. Probably most of you do not know this theory, but this theory says that and demonstrates empirically that there are three fundamental needs that people have, and that fulfilling these needs really is an important component of well-being. And one of the important needs they talk about is autonomy, but they don't see autonomy as free will, as is normally understood in common language. They see autonomy as our capacity to really align our behavior with our own values, motivations. So it's the capacity to actually internalize regulations, and then self-regulate in an autonomous way. We can discuss about this later. It's a bit complicated to explain in a short time. But the idea is that we have this capacity to not be subjected to contextual influences, in absolute terms, so in 100% terms. Yeah. Recent research in psychology and especially in neuroscience have shown some interesting things about this, because we tend to see agency in very rational terms also in a lot of the disciplines we come from. And we tend to see it also as this sort of capacity for reflectiveness and imagination. But the point is that what psychologists are showing is that it's actually an embodied, affective, and relational processing of human experience. Yeah. So, in a way, we cannot, and this is the agency structure debate in sociology, we do not see, agency is not radical transcendence, yeah, and this is something that Richard was saying in another way yesterday as well, but it's not either radical submission to context, we're not radically defined by our context, yeah, we have the capacity to transcend this. So the questions then becomes, if agency is a relational process, what types of contexts and relationships promote it? And also at the same time, what processes come into play for certain groups to develop a feeling of collective agency? I will not have time to go into all this, but the issue is that a lot of research in psychology, and you've known this, because nudging has become so popular, has shown that a lot of behavior is automatic, yeah, or it's not controlled by our conscious ability to monitor our behavior. Doesn't go very far. We have a lot of limitations in this. And so in this, nudging has become popular because it makes use of these sort of heuristics that we use and the brain uses to make us do the right thing. So the context can determine us to behave sustainably, consume sustainably. But the question is, whose nudge? So this is the issue of power. Nudging can be used in many different directions. You can use nudging to sell cars. You can use nudging, to sell the fastest, most highly polluting car. So this becomes important. Then we need to start talking about groups and identities. So who defines these nudges? Who defines the direction we go into when we talk about agency? And there's an interesting body of research here also that I think is less known and it's interesting, which is based on a theory called social comparison theory, which shows that agency is not so straightforward as we think. So we might have instrumental or behavioral dimensions to agency where we mobilize for action to transcend our circumstances and to be able to make something happen, to shape our circumstances and our destinies. But also there's psychological strategies that we use sometimes when we are in a position of less power in a given society. And sometimes those strategies go in the direction of promoting the status quo, but they still are a manifestation of agency. So this raises an important question, what are the limitations of agency when we have this issue of psychological strategies? And if you're interested, I can then explain what these psychological strategies mean. Another thing that I think it's important when we talk about agency is discussing this myth of material utility maximization. This is a very nice quote from BBC News when they were talking about an initiative, Waste Not, Want Not, making money from rubbish. And they said, as for the individual consumers that send in stuff to recycle, he points out that they need nothing, they get nothing tangible in return. You're buying a good feeling, so that's a harder product service to sell. There's a lack of physical payback. It's not like buying a coffee or knapsack. You're selling something esoteric. Esoteric it may be, but investors are interested. Yeah, so the question in this this is an important question because there's this idea, and Tim was saying that what we need is a new set of values. But actually, it might be that there are other reasons grounded in experience that do not need new values for this new society. I'm not saying that values are not important. I'm just saying there are other reasons to show that actually materialism is not related to well-being. So there's a whole load of research that says that materialism actually doesn't lead to well-being. And not even material affluence leads to well-being. So that's a contentious issue that we can discuss later. Let's move. Ricardo mentioned what we do in the Glamorous Project. So the way we look at lifestyles in the Glamorous Project is as patterns of time use. And there's been very interesting research about the effects of scarcity and why scarcity is important for agency. Yeah? Two researchers from Princeton and Harvard did these nice experiments where they showed that people that have the scarcity of time act in the same way as scarcity of money or scarcity of food. So on the one hand, the logic of scarcity perpetuates itself. And on the other, what goes on is scarcity hijacks the brain. Yeah, it makes the brain focus on one issue only and get into this pattern where there's no way that there's no possibility for one to transcend those particular circumstances. So looking at lifestyles as patterns of time use can be very interesting in discussing agency and the relationship between agency and structure. And looking at space is another dimension that we'll discuss later. Yeah, let's move. So, yes, I told her that she needs to do that with us as well. So I will have to stop in just 30 seconds. So basically, yes, there's lots of things that I could say here, but the thing that we are finding in our preliminary results in the project is that time affluence is very related to well-being, far beyond material affluence. This is something that has been proven slightly in previous research as well. Material rewards are elusive. Yeah, that's what I was telling you earlier about values, because material rewards lead to what it's called the hedonic treadmill effect. So the more we have, the more we need, and we're never satisfied, basically. And agency relies on time affluence and satisfaction of needs. This is a broad statement. There's much more discussions. And finally, to give an example of the positive and the negative. So both these groups manifest agency. They transcend their circumstances and they make something happen. They maybe also exercise autonomy to a significant degree. But it depends how this is articulated and for what goals. Yeah? So that's the dark. Agency is not necessarily positive in all cases. And we need to, I think, discuss this and unpack this a bit more. Yeah. Thank you. Sometimes organized, in many circumstances, even terrorist groups organize to transcend what they think are unfair circumstances and contexts that limit their ability to pursue their goals. Yeah, so they're also shapers, active shapers of their destinies. They think so. They perceive so. So they, in a strict definition of agency, if we take the definition at the beginning, they exercise agency as well, just as sustainable initiatives exercise agency when they gather together as a group and decide what they want to do and start to change the world. So both groups do, and it might be that some of the mechanisms are the same behind that. The psychological mechanisms are the same. So then, what makes the difference? Who, and it's probably about power, and it's probably about who has leadership, and it's probably about how leadership is distributed, it's probably about democracy or democratic governance, so it's important in discussions of agency. Yeah.
Just one question,
no? No, it's 5 minutes now, so it's okay. I think Anne was first.
How do you assess, how do you quantify lifestyle changes? By interviews, and on what level of entity do you assess it? Individuals or also the, as you call, collective agencies?
Yeah, so we look at both levels. We have in the project we have a regional level of analysis where we really look at individuals, not so much at groups. We look at some social factors that influence, sort of patterns of lifestyles, because lifestyles are patterned. Things we do, things we consume, patterns of time use are really, to a certain degree, predictable. Yeah? And so we look at that, but then we also look at the initiatives. We look at sustainable initiatives, and at that level, we look at the collective aspect of agency. We look at both individual and collective in that case. Yeah. Richard?
Wonderful presentation, thank you. So if I ask this now, I won't have to talk about it later. The other thing that I'm quite curious about, besides just sort of the positive and negative element of agency, is the degree to which, because I think the transitions literature misses this a little bit, the degree to which agency can also be about resisting change rather than promoting change, right? People act and people feel they have the capacity to act, but sometimes that action isn't necessarily about moving forward to some change that you want to see happening. It's about being nervous about some change that you see happening and digging in your heels a bit.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. And, so I know you're familiar with a lot of the psychological theories in social psychology. And system justification theory, for example, was explaining why people exhibit resistance. I'm not sure I'm not sure how much we can extend the limits of the concept of agency to really look at resistance in that way, if resistance goes in the direction of maintaining the status quo. So maybe the relationship we need to be talking about in terms of agency is this relationship between what is the status quo and promotion of the status quo. and what is resistance or change to the status quo. You know what I mean? So, for example, resistance to change sometimes go in the direction of the promotion, of perpetuation, of the status quo.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I do think that the transitions literature in particular, I mean, because there are different forms of resistance, right? I mean, it's not necessarily just keeping it one particular way, but there are multiple forms that it could take.
Yeah.
So that treating that symmetrically, I think, is quite important.
Yeah, I agree. Marcus?
Yes, very similar comment, experience from the Arts Project. I just would like to support what you have said, because when we selected our transition initiatives, that was not so easy to decide who would like to have a transition we think of. A lot of people would like to have a transition towards different things.
Yeah.
Maybe not that radical, but it's not that easy. So, and then agency comes in, and also the resistance point, that also some initiatives which try to resist different things. So, and so there we are in a discussion about values and other things, and that's just, I have the feeling that transition literature does not really reflect so much on that until now, because we universally share more or less what we would aim for.
Yeah.
But it's totally different if you invite people from other initiatives, from other groups, and discuss with them. And then you will discover, as you said, right, from their perspective, it's also very clear what a transition should look like. And that's not the one we share here, just to support it.
Yeah. Yeah, Fatima?
Hi, congratulations. It's very interesting, I think. I was thinking about the concept of agency and the concept of empowerment. So it looks like similar, or what do you think about it?
This is a whole debate we've started in the Transit project. So we're building a conceptualization that can separate the two. I think there's significant overlap between the two, between agency and empowerment, and a lot of authors talk about them interchangeably. And actually, I think a lot of the literature starts to talk more about empowerment and less about agency, because agency is such a fuzzy concept, and it includes so many different things that are fuzzy. While empowerment has been researched in a more systematic way, sometimes it has been also like measured with psychological instruments or scales and political science instruments and so on. So I think it's not easy. There's a significant overlap between the two, but I think there's a way of differentiating if we look at agency as a capacity we have, and we look at empowerment as sort of the instrumental aspect, sort of a more instrumental aspect of agency. Although that would be contested by other people, because some people consider that agency is both a capacity and has an instrumental dimension to it. So, it's open for debate.